Welcome to Miss Scarlett, the place to be feminine. Subscribe and enjoy. The yellow porch light flickered as moths danced around it in the warm spring evening. From inside, the clink of dishes and low murmur of conversation drifted out the screen door. Paul wiped his palms on his jeans, his heart already fluttering in his chest as he stepped into the house. In the kitchen, his parents and sister were setting the table for their weekly family dinner. His mom smiled warmly as she set down a basket of rolls. "There you are. Grab some plates, hon." Paul nodded and slid into his usual chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. As dishes were passed and food piled onto plates, easy conversation flowed around him while his own thoughts raced. Under the table, his leg bounced up and down. "You're quiet tonight. Everything all right?" His dad, Tom, cast him a concerned glance as he scooped green beans onto his plate. Paul forced a half smile. "Yeah, just tired from work." He picked at his mashed potatoes, as Jenna, his younger sister, chattered on about her college classes. Paul found his gaze drifting to his dad. Tom listened intently, his caring blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he laughed at a story she told. He had always been patient and loving, quick to wrap them in a bear hug after a rough day. An unexpected lump formed in Paul's throat. Would his dad still look at him the same way if he knew the truth? "Paul?" He blinked, realizing the table had gone quiet. "Sorry, what?" "I asked if you could pass the salt," his mom repeated, frowning slightly. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine, promise. Just spaced out for a minute." He handed her the salt shaker, avoiding her searching gaze. As dishes were cleared away, Paul hung back, twisting the dish towel in his hands. His dad looked over from washing pots in the sink. "Feel like drying?" Paul stepped up beside him, taking the wet plate handed to him. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. Paul cleared his throat. "Hey, Dad, can we talk later? There's something I want to tell you." Tom glanced at him, his brow furrowing for a brief moment before his expression smoothed. "Of course. Meet you out back in 10?" Paul nodded, not quite trusting his voice. The fluttering in his stomach intensified into a swarm of butterflies. The backyard was dark, except for the small porch light and the faint glow of fireflies in the grass. Paul perched on the edge of the patio chair, his leg bouncing again. Footsteps crunched across the gravel, and then his dad settled into the other chair with a quiet sigh. "Nice night," Tom remarked, tilting his head back to gaze up at the star-strewn sky. "Yeah." Paul rubbed his damp palms on his jeans. His heart pounded against his ribs like a caged bird. His dad turned to face him, his expression soft in the low light. "What's on your mind, son?" Paul took a shaky breath. There's something about me I never told you, or anyone really." He swallowed hard. "I don't feel right in my body, like this male exterior doesn't match who I am inside." Tom was quiet, listening intently. Paul wrapped his arms around his middle. "I think I'm transgender," he whispered. "I want to transition to female." The words hung in the night air. Paul held his breath, not daring to look at his dad. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. "Oh, Paul." His dad's voice was thick with emotion. "Come here." Strong arms enveloped him, and Paul let out a choked sob, burying his face in his dad's shoulder. Tom rubbed soothing circles on his back. "I love you, no matter what," Tom murmured. "Nothing will ever change that. I'm so proud of you for telling me." Paul couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just clung tighter, tears soaking into his dad's shirt. When he finally pulled back, Tom squeezed his shoulders, eyes shining with unshed tears of his own. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Paul managed a watery smile and nodded. The tight, suffocating feeling in his chest eased its grip, letting him take a full breath for what felt like the first time in years. The next morning, Paul woke slowly, his limbs heavy with the best sleep he'd had in months. Sunlight streamed in through a gap in the curtains. He stretched and sat up, running a hand through his short brown hair. Fragments of the conversation with his dad last night flickered through his mind. The initial anxiety, the flood of relief that followed. A small smile curved his lips. He felt lighter somehow, like a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Padding downstairs in socked feet, he found his parents in the kitchen sipping coffee. His mom looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Morning, sleepyhead. There's a fresh pot if you want some." "Thanks." Paul grabbed a mug from the cabinet. His dad folded his newspaper and smiled. "I was thinking maybe we could go shopping this weekend. Get you some new clothes to start building your wardrobe." An unexpected lump formed in Paul's throat at the casual acceptance in his tone. "That would be great. Thanks, Dad." Tom winked. "Just promise you'll help your old man pick out something fashionable." Paul laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep in his chest. His mom glanced between them curiously, but didn't comment, just squeezed his arm as he slid into his chair. As Paul stirred sugar into his coffee, a thrill of nervous excitement zipped through him. The enormity of the road ahead, doctor's appointments, hormone therapy, legal name changes, stretched out before him. But for the first time, it felt possible. He had his dad by his side. Together they would navigate this uncharted path, figuring it out one step at a time. Paul smiled into his mug. A new chapter of his life was beginning, one where he could finally, wholly be himself. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Paul slipped from beneath the covers that weekend morning, his stomach already fluttering. He put on his most androgynous outfit, black skinny jeans and a soft gray sweater, and stared at his reflection in the mirror. A glimmer of anticipation sparkled in his green eyes, his cheeks flushed with nervous excitement. Today, he would take a tangible step forward in his transition, choosing items that reflected how he felt inside, seeing himself as he wanted the world to see him, as a woman. A soft knock sounded at his bedroom door. "Come in," he called, turning as it cracked open. His father's silvery head poked inside. "Morning. About ready to go." Paul nodded, taking a steadying breath. "As I'll ever be." The drive to the mall was quiet, Tom drumming his fingers on the steering wheel as he hummed along to the radio. Paul twisted his hands in his lap, his knee bouncing. As if sensing his anxiety, his dad reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "We'll take it slow, okay? No pressure." Paul exhaled, managing a small smile. "Thanks, Dad." The parking lot was already full of Saturday shoppers as they pulled in. Paul's heart rate ticked up as they walked through the automatic doors into the bright, perfumed interior. His eyes skimmed over the rainbow of colors, the glittering jewelry displays, the swish of soft fabrics. It was a whole new world. His palms dampened. "Well, where to first?" His dad surveyed the directory. "How about—" He looked to Paul expectantly. Paul swallowed. "The dress section, I think." His voice came out higher than usual. Tom nodded easily. "Lead the way." They wove between racks draped in floral prints and bold solids. Paul's fingers trailed over the delicate lace, the smooth satin. Each brush sent a little thrill through him. A soft blush pink caught his eye. He paused, pulling it out to admire the figure-skimming shape, the feminine ruffles at the shoulders. Holding it up to himself, he dared a glance at his reflection in a nearby mirror. His breath caught. For a moment, he glimpsed a version of himself he'd only imagined. Curves and soft edges, vulnerability and strength. Tears pricked his eyes. He blinked them back. "That's lovely," his dad said quietly from behind him. "You should try it on." In the dressing room, Paul's hands shook as he undressed. He unzipped the dress and stepped into it, pulling it up over his hips. The whisper of fabric against his skin felt like a revelation. Turning to the mirror, his mouth fell open. Even with his short hair and angular frame, wearing a dress felt right in a bone-deep way, a missing piece sliding into place. A knock startled him, and he jumped. "Everything all right in there?" his dad's muffled voice asked. Yeah, you can come in." The door cracked, and Tom peeked his head in. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of his child in a dress. Tears sprang to Paul's eyes. "How do I look?" His dad smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Like my beautiful daughter," he said simply. A sob caught in Paul's throat. He launched himself at his dad, wrapping his arms around him tightly. Tom hugged him back just as fiercely. "I am so proud of you," he murmured. "My brave girl." They both pretended not to notice the tears that dampened their cheeks as they separated. Paul gave a watery laugh. "Guess it's a keeper!" "Absolutely," Tom agreed. "I think this is cause for celebration. How about lunch after this? My treat." Paul beamed, dabbing at his eyes. "Sounds perfect." As he changed back into his old clothes, he couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, he felt truly seen, like he was on the path to becoming his most authentic self. He had a long journey ahead, but he knew without a doubt his dad would be beside him for every step, accepting him, fighting for him, loving him unconditionally. Today was just the beginning. Paul hugged the dress to his chest, happiness radiating through every cell in his body. The sun-warmed asphalt of the parking lot shimmered like a mirage as Paul and his dad carried their bags of clothes to the car. The pink dress had been joined by soft cardigans, flowy skirts, and even a pair of strappy sandals. Each item felt like a promise of comfort, of confidence, of a truer reflection in the mirror each day. As Tom popped the trunk, Paul shifted from foot to foot. "Dad? He glanced over. "Thank you. For today, for..." Paul swallowed. "For everything." Tom's expression softened. He pulled Paul into a tight hug right there between the cars. "You never need to thank me for loving you," he said gruffly. "I will always support you, no matter what. Nothing could change that." Paul buried his face in his dad's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. Tears pricked his eyes. He had never doubted his parents' love, but to have it reaffirmed so fiercely, so unequivocally, it meant more than he could express. "All right," Tom said, clearing his throat as he pulled back. "Enough of this sappy stuff. Let's go get some grub. I'm starved." Paul laughed, swiping at his damp cheeks. "Sounds good." At the restaurant, the waitress smiled as she took their order. "And for you, miss?" Paul blinked, a flush crawling up his neck. "Oh, I'll have the Caesar salad, please." His voice wobbled only slightly. As she walked away, Tom reached across the table and squeezed Paul's hand. "Get used to it, sweetheart," he said with a gentle smile. "It suits you." Paul ducked his head, warmth blooming in his chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. For the first time, a stranger had seen him as he wanted to be seen, as a young woman. It felt like a tiny miracle, a glimpse into a brighter future, one step closer every day. Their food arrived, and they tucked in, chatting lightly between bites. Paul found himself giggling and gesturing animatedly as he shared stories from work, his usual self-consciousness falling away. His dad watched him with soft, proud eyes, chuckling along. "Oh, that reminds me." Tom set down his fork and fixed Paul with a serious look. "Have you thought at all about a new name? I'd be honored to help you pick one out." Paul's throat tightened with emotion. He had spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, turning over potential names in his head. But to have his dad not only acknowledge, but take an active role in one of the most personal and significant parts of his transition. "I do have one in mind," he admitted, "but I wanted to discuss it with you first." "Well, don't leave me in suspense," Tom teased. "What is it?" Paul took a deep breath. "Mary, after Grandma." Tom's eyes widened and then softened, growing bright with unshed tears. "Oh, honey, she would be so touched." "You think so?" Paul whispered. "I know so. She adored you, and she would be incredibly proud of the woman you're becoming." Tom reached out and clasped Paul's hands. "As am I. Mary suits you beautifully." A wobbly smile broke across Paul's face. "Thanks, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, Mary. So very much." They finished their meal, conversation flowing easily. Paul felt lighter than he had in years, laughter bubbling up freely. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he moved through the world as Mary, vibrant and confident and wholly herself. It was exhilarating and terrifying and filled him with a fierce hope. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be obstacles and people who wouldn't understand. But as he looked at his dad's warm, accepting face across the table, he also knew he wouldn't be facing any of it alone. With the unconditional love and support of his family, he could weather any storm. Mary was ready to boldly step into the wonderful, complex, sometimes messy adventure of living authentically. She couldn't wait to introduce herself to the world.